The fog settled thick over the graveyard that night, a gray shroud that dulled the edges of every crooked tombstone, every gnarled tree that twisted and creaked under the weight of centuries. Ethan pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders as he stepped through the iron gates, half joking to himself that the place seemed to swallow sound. His flashlight's narrow beam cut a path through the mist, but even the light seemed reluctant to venture too far, vanishing into the shadows like it was afraid to illuminate what might be hiding there. Ethan hadn't intended to end up in the graveyard at all. He was just trying to find a shortcut home. His phone battery had died miles back, and he was too stubborn to turn back. Now, as he moved through the silence, he regretted his decision. There was something ancient and heavy in the air here, a feeling like the ground itself was holding its breath. He tried not to look too closely at the gravestones. Most were broken or faded, the dates too worn to read, but there was something unsettling about the way they leaned, like they were slowly sinking back into the earth that had given them up. And then he noticed something strange. Several of the graves looked freshly disturbed. The earth churned up as if someone, or something, had been digging from below. A chill traced down his spine, but he pushed it aside. Probably just an animal, he told himself. Maybe a raccoon or a stray dog. But even as he thought it, he knew that didn't feel right. There was something deliberate about the way the soil was pushed aside, a methodical quality that didn't fit any animal he'd ever seen. Strange discoveries. Ethan kept walking, quickening his pace as he tried to shake the feeling of being watched. But the sense of unease grew stronger with every step, his heart beating a little faster as he caught sight of something strange in the beam of his flashlight. Claw marks, deep, ragged scratches gouged into the stone of a tomb, as if something with enormous claws had been trying to dig its way in or out. A nervous laugh escaped him. Maybe some bored kids with a chisel, he muttered under his breath, but the laughter died quickly. He knew these scratches hadn't been made by any human hand. The gouges were too large, too deep. They ran down the face of the tombstone like the desperate marks of something trapped, clawing its way free. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound, coming from somewhere close by. He froze, listening, as the noise grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from beneath his feet. The ground shifted slightly, a tremor so subtle he might have imagined it if it weren't for the small stones around him vibrating, dancing across the dirt. He stumbled back, his heart hammering in his chest as the ground settled again. The scratching had stopped. Just an earthquake, he whispered, trying to convince himself, but deep down, he knew. He could feel it, a primal instinct screaming in the back of his mind. He wasn't alone here. Something was under the ground, and it was awake. Ethan took a shaky step back, every nerve in his body screaming to leave, to sprint back the way he'd come and forget he'd ever set foot in this graveyard. But his curiosity, or maybe it was his fear, kept him rooted in place. He aimed his flashlight at the ground, where the soil had shifted, straining his ears for any hint of the sound again. And then, without warning, the earth exploded. A shower of dirt and small stones erupted as something massive burst from the ground just a few feet in front of him. Ethan stumbled backward, raising his arm to shield his face, his flashlight skittering across the ground, casting long, erratic shadows. The creature was huge, grotesque, a monstrous, twisted version of something that might once have resembled a mole, but was now something far worse. Its flesh was mottled and pale, the texture of diseased skin stretched taut over powerful muscles. Massive claws, thick and razor-sharp, jutted from its hands, coated in soil and bits of stone. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he got a good look at its face. Small, milky eyes peered out from a skull-like head, and its nose was long, twitching as it picked up his scent. Its mouth, a wide, unsettling maw lined with rows of sharp, yellowed teeth, hung open, revealing a slick, dark tongue that flicked at the air. He fought the instinct to scream, knowing any sudden movement would only attract its attention. But the creature didn't need sight to sense him. Its head cocked toward him, nostrils flaring as it inhaled deeply, its body shuddering with the effort. Ethan's skin prickled as he realized it was savoring his scent, as though it recognized him as prey. The monster sniffed the air again, and then, with a horrifying rumble, it lunged. Ethan threw himself to the side, narrowly missing the slash of its claws as they tore through the earth where he'd been standing. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him as he scrambled to his feet, frantically looking for his flashlight. The beam was flickering weakly, half buried in the dirt a few feet away. He grabbed it, fumbling with the switch as the creature's heavy, guttural breathing filled the silence. He could hear it moving, the crunch of its claws digging into the ground as it circled him, listening, sensing. Ethan held his breath, feeling every instinct screaming at him to run. But he knew the second he moved, the creature would hear him. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it burrow back into the earth. Within moments, the creature had vanished, leaving only a ragged hole in the ground and the faint, unsettling tremors beneath his feet. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to comprehend what he'd just seen. The thing wasn't just dangerous. It could move through the ground itself, disappearing and reappearing at will. And worst of all, he could feel it moving, the faint vibrations like the pulse of some monstrous heartbeat, always lurking just beneath him. He couldn't stay in one place. That much was clear. If he wanted to survive, he needed to stay one step ahead, moving faster than the creature could track him. Taking a deep breath, he started to walk, his flashlight illuminating a narrow path in the fog as he scanned the ground for any sign of the creature's next attack. But deep down, he knew it was only a matter of time before it surfaced again. As he moved, Ethan's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. He'd heard stories of strange things happening in this part of town, rumors of an old curse that haunted the graveyard, but he'd always brushed them off as nonsense. Yet now, stumbling through the mist with a creature lurking beneath him, those stories came rushing back with terrible clarity. Somewhere along the row of graves, he found a dilapidated old chapel, its roof partially caved in and the door hanging crooked on its hinges. Ethan slipped inside, hoping the creature couldn't sense him through the stone walls. He leaned against a broken pew, his breathing ragged as he tried to collect his thoughts. That's when he noticed something strange carved into the wall behind the altar. The stone was covered in symbols, scratched deep and jagged, as if gouged by claws. The designs looked almost like a map, with lines crisscrossing a crude outline of the graveyard, and symbols scattered across the area, places where the earth had been disturbed. At the center of the map was a single figure, roughly drawn. A man holding a spade, with his eyes carved into dark, hollow pits. Ethan shuddered as he realized the figure's face looked strikingly similar to the creature he'd just encountered. A memory flickered in his mind, one of the old legends he'd overheard about this place. The story of a cursed gravedigger named Ambrose, who had once worked here centuries ago. Ambrose had been accused of grave robbing, desecrating the dead for profit, selling bones and relics to anyone who would pay. When the townspeople finally caught him, they'd sentenced him to death, but not before he cursed the land, swearing he would return to take vengeance on anyone who dared trespass in his graveyard. But instead of being buried in a coffin, Ambrose had been sentenced to a different fate. They forced him to dig his own grave and then buried him alive. Ethan felt a sickening sense of horror as he considered the implications. Could the creature be Ambrose, twisted by time and curse into the monstrous thing that now hunted him? The ground beneath his feet shifted again, the faint vibrations pulsing through the stone floor. It was as if the creature sensed him even here, sensing his intrusion in the one place it had once called its own. Desperation filled him as he glanced around the chapel, hoping for anything that might help him. His eyes landed on a rusted shovel leaning against the wall, half buried in rubble. It wasn't much, but it was something. He grabbed it, gripping the handle tightly as he tried to steady his shaking hands. Just as he turned to leave, he heard the scratching again, louder this time, echoing through the chapel walls. He froze, the realization sinking in with a sickening dread. The creature was tunneling toward him, its claws scraping through the earth like the sound of nails on a chalkboard. Ethan backed away, his mind racing. He couldn't outrun it forever. Sooner or later, he would have to face it. The scratching grew louder, filling the chapel like a sinister chorus echoing off the walls. Ethan's fingers tightened around the rusty shovel as he glanced around, looking for any way out. He knew he couldn't stay here. The creature was tunneling closer with each second, closing in on him. With a deep breath, he sprinted toward the door, throwing himself into the misty darkness outside. The night was silent again, save for his ragged breathing and the faint, tremulous pulse beneath his feet as the creature followed him, a dark shadow beneath the soil. He ran through the maze of graves, darting between tombstones and tripping over exposed roots and loose stones. He could feel it beneath him, its movements creating small tremors that echoed through the ground. His mind was blank with fear, driven only by the instinct to survive. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to keep moving, to stay ahead of the creature's relentless pursuit. But no matter how fast he ran, it was always there, lurking just beneath him, its claws rending the soil in its quest to reach him. Then he heard it again, the sound of earth splitting open, followed by a deep, guttural snarl. The ground erupted in front of him as the creature surfaced, its pale, skeletal face twisting in a grotesque grin as it blocked his path. Ethan skidded to a halt, panic flooding his mind as he looked around for an escape. His heart hammered as he saw an open grave a few feet away, its edges crumbling and overgrown. Without thinking, he sprinted toward it and threw himself inside, landing hard on the damp earth at the bottom. The creature loomed above him, its twisted head cocking to the side as it sensed his position. Ethan held his breath, pressing himself against the wall of the grave, his mind racing. He could feel it, the monstrous, heavy presence just above, sniffing the air, its claws flexing as it prepared to strike. In a burst of desperation, he jabbed the shovel upward, aiming blindly. He felt the metal connect with a sickening crunch, and the creature let out a shriek, a sound that ripped through the night like tearing metal. Ethan scrambled out of the grave, taking advantage of the creature's momentary distraction, and sprinted again, not daring to look back. He ran blindly, the fog swallowing him as he weaved through the gravestones. Every nerve in his body was on fire, every instinct screaming at him to keep moving, to stay one step ahead of the creature that hunted him with a patience that seemed almost supernatural. Ahead, he saw a faint outline of something large and rectangular, a mausoleum half hidden in the mist. He sprinted toward it, hoping its stone walls would offer him some protection. Reaching the door, he threw himself inside, slamming it shut behind him. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of dust and decay, but he barely noticed as he backed away from the entrance, his eyes fixed on the door, waiting for any sign of movement. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the faint scratching began again, closer this time, the sound of claws against stone. Ethan pressed his back against the far wall, gripping the shovel as he tried to calm his breathing. The creature was outside, sniffing, its claws scraping against the mausoleum walls as it circled, searching for a way in. His mind raced, trying to think of a plan, some way to escape. But there was no way out of the mausoleum. The only exit was the door he'd just come through, and he knew the creature was waiting for him on the other side. He was trapped. Then he noticed something strange, a faint glow coming from one of the stone slabs lining the wall. He approached it cautiously, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch it. The stone felt cold beneath his fingers, but there was something else, a faint warmth radiating from within, as if something was alive inside. He pushed against the slab, and to his surprise, it shifted, sliding open to reveal a narrow passageway, leading down into the darkness. Ethan didn't hesitate. He slipped inside, pulling the slab back into place behind him just as the creature's claws scraped against the door, rattling it in its frame. The passage was narrow and dark, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and rot. Ethan's flashlight flickered, casting a dim glow that barely illuminated the space around him. He could hear the creature above, snarling and clawing at the mausoleum, but the sounds were muffled now, distant. He took a deep breath, feeling a small surge of relief. He had bought himself some time, but as he moved deeper into the passage, a new sense of dread filled him. The walls were lined with ancient bones, stacked in uneven piles, their hollow eyes staring back at him as he passed. He realized with a sickening clarity that this was an ossuary, a hidden catacomb where the dead were left to rot. And as he walked, he noticed something even more unsettling. Some of the bones were marked with the same claw marks he'd seen in the graveyard. He shuddered, the realization dawning on him with a terrifying certainty. The creature had been here before, digging through the catacombs, leaving its mark on the dead. The passage twisted and turned, leading him deeper underground. His footsteps echoed through the silence, and he could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on him, a claustrophobic reminder of how deep he was, how far he'd come from any hope of escape. Then, up ahead, he saw a faint light, a small, flickering flame, like a candle left burning. He moved toward it, hoping it might lead him to an exit, but as he approached, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The light was coming from a small alcove, where a stone altar sat, covered in strange symbols carved into the rock. And there, resting on the altar, was a leather-bound book, its cover worn and cracked, the pages yellowed with age. Ethan picked it up, feeling a strange, unsettling pull as he opened it. The pages were filled with strange diagrams and incantations, symbols he didn't recognize, but one thing was clear. This book was a grimoire, a record of dark rituals. And as he flipped through the pages, he found something that sent a shiver down his spine. A sketch of a creature, with claws like spades and a face twisted in agony. Below it was a single word, scrawled in dark ink, Ambrose. Ethan's hands trembled as he read the text beneath the drawing, the words describing a forbidden ritual, a curse that bound the gravedigger's soul to the earth, transforming him into a creature of soil and shadow, forever doomed to hunt in the graveyard where he'd once worked. The curse fed on trespassers, drawing strength from the fear of those it hunted. Suddenly, the walls seemed to close in around him, the weight of the curse pressing down on him with a suffocating intensity. He stumbled back, the book slipping from his hands as he realized the horrible truth. He was part of the curse now. By setting foot in the graveyard, he had triggered the ritual, become a part of the creature's endless hunt. A deep rumbling filled the passageway, and Ethan felt the ground shake as the creature's claws dug into the soil above, burrowing down toward him. There was no time to think, no time to run. The creature was coming, and he was trapped. The rumbling grew louder, like a coming storm beneath his feet, reverberating through the narrow passage. Ethan stumbled back, his breath catching as he realized the creature was tunneling directly toward him. He could feel the soil shifting around him, the walls vibrating with the force of the creature's approach. In a frantic moment, his eyes darted back to the altar and the grimoire lying open on the cold stone. An idea struck him, a desperate, reckless idea, but it was his only hope. The book had described the curse, detailing the ritual that had transformed Ambrose into this monstrous creature. Perhaps, he thought, there might be something within its pages that could stop him. Ethan snatched up the book, his fingers fumbling as he flipped through the brittle pages. He skimmed the strange words, his mind racing as he searched for anything that resembled an incantation to break the curse. But the text was dense, the symbols twisted and strange, and he felt his panic rising as the scratching grew louder, closer. A claw burst through the wall, spraying dust and bone fragments across the passage. Ethan staggered back, his heart pounding as he watched the wall crumble, revealing the creature's pale, leering face. Its milky eyes glistened with a dark intelligence, a twisted mockery of the humanity it had once possessed. Ambrose had found him, and there was nowhere left to run. With a surge of desperation, Ethan lifted the shovel, gripping it tightly as the creature crawled through the wall, its claws dragging against the stones with a sickening scrape. The creature paused, its head tilting as it sniffed the air, as if savoring the scent of his fear. "Ambrose," Ethan whispered, hoping that some remnant of humanity might still be buried within the creature. "I know what happened to you. I know about the curse." For a moment, the creature hesitated, its head tilting slightly, its claws pausing mid-air. A flicker of recognition crossed its twisted features, and Ethan felt a faint glimmer of hope. But then the creature snarled, a deep, guttural sound that rumbled from its chest, and lunged. Ethan swung the shovel, the metal edge connecting with the creature's arm. It roared, pulling back as dark blood oozed from the wound. But it wasn't enough to stop it. The creature lunged again, its claws raking across Ethan's arm, slicing through his coat and drawing blood. He staggered back, his vision blurring with pain as he struggled to keep his grip on the shovel. The creature was relentless, its eyes fixed on him with a hunger that was almost supernatural. He could feel the life draining from him, his strength waning as he faced the creature, knowing he wouldn't last much longer. In a last, desperate act, he raised the grimoire, shouting the incantation he'd found in the margin of one page, words scrawled hastily by some ancient hand. He didn't know if they would work, didn't even know if he was pronouncing them correctly, but he poured every ounce of his will into the words, his voice echoing through the narrow passage. The creature hesitated, its eyes widening as the words hit it like a physical blow. It writhed, claws tearing at the earth, as if trying to escape the force of the incantation. Ethan felt a surge of hope, the realization that he was weakening it, breaking the curse's hold. But then the creature's eyes met his, and he saw something that made his blood run cold. Hatred, pure and unfiltered. The rage of a soul damned to an eternity of suffering. With a roar, it lunged, knocking the book from his hands and pinning him against the wall. Ethan struggled, gasping for breath as the creature's claws closed around his throat, its pale, skeletal face inches from his own. He could smell the rot on its breath, feel the chill of its touch seeping into his skin. This was the end. He could feel the life slipping away from him, the darkness closing in as the creature's grip tightened. But then, in a final burst of adrenaline, he remembered the shovel in his hand. With the last of his strength, he drove the shovel upward, jamming it into the creature's side. The monster shrieked, a bone-chilling sound that echoed through the passage as it stumbled back, releasing him. Ethan fell to the ground, gasping for breath as he watched the creature writhe, its form flickering in the dim light. The curse was weakening, he realized, the incantation having done its work, loosening the creature's hold on the physical world. With trembling hands, he picked up the grimoire and began reciting the incantation again, his voice shaking but resolute. The creature let out a final, anguished roar, its body convulsing as it began to dissolve, crumbling into dust and shadows. Its milky eyes locked onto his one last time, a silent promise of vengeance, before it vanished into the earth. The silence that followed was absolute, the heavy, suffocating quiet of a place finally at peace. Ethan slumped to the ground, his body aching, his mind numb with exhaustion. He had survived. Ethan emerged from the mausoleum as dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the fog, casting long shadows across the graveyard. The world felt different, lighter somehow, as if the weight of the curse had finally lifted. He took a deep breath, savoring the cool morning air, the warmth of the sun on his face. But as he made his way toward the iron gates, a faint whisper reached his ears, drifting on the morning breeze. A voice, low and chilling, calling his name. He froze, turning back to the graveyard, his heart pounding as he scanned the rows of tombstones. For a moment, he saw nothing, only the crumbling stones and the gnarled trees, their branches swaying in the wind. But then, from the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of something moving beneath the earth, a faint ripple in the soil. The whisper grew louder, echoing through his mind, a voice that was neither dead nor alive. And in that moment, he knew the truth. The curse had not been broken. It had merely shifted, passed on to him like a dark inheritance. He staggered back, horror dawning on him as he realized he was no longer free. The graveyard would haunt him now, the voice of Ambrose a constant shadow in the back of his mind, an unbreakable bond that bound him to this cursed ground. And one day, when his time came, he would return here, a new guardian for the graveyard, cursed to hunt the next trespasser who dared to disturb the dead. As he walked away, his shadow stretched long and dark across the graveyard, his footsteps echoing in the silence, a solitary figure leaving behind a place that would never truly let him go.